All right. So you saw the video from Todd Frill, right?
Which one?
The one where he came out, I don't know, a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago and said that if the government says that we should go into a grocery store with pinwheels on our heads, then we have to submit to the government and go into the grocery store with pinwheels on our head or
I
something
heard the
ridiculous
audio
like
of it.
that. I'm not going to replay it. I mean, everybody's seen it. If you haven't seen it, you go look it up. But
I heard White talking about it too.
Yeah. Why? Yeah. All right. So, I guess what we're going to try to talk about here is, somewhere there's the truth. Somewhere there's a line that we draw where we are required as Christians to submit to government, and we are. That's clear. Romans 13 is clear about that.
Yeah.
But there is a line somewhere.
Titus 2 as well.
Yeah. So personally, I think it's totally absurd to walk into a grocery store with pinwheels on your heads and demoralize and dehumanize yourself. But I mean, is that legitimate? Should we? Are we required to do that? Is it sinful for us to do that? I guess that's really the question. What is the government's purpose for doing that? Is it to cause harm? Is it for our good? Is it to uphold justice? I mean,
well, my take on that, obviously he was using the pinwheels on our head thing as an illustration of basically whatever. I think what he was trying to say is that whatever the government requires of us that is not in itself sinful, we are to submit to, extending to the extreme of walking into a store with pinwheels on our head. If I think if you were in on this podcast, you'd say, yeah, that's what I meant.
I think that's legitimate. I don't disagree with you. I think the question is, where does it become sinful? At what point does? And then we talked about this a little bit earlier privately before we did this podcast. About with the do we submit if they come to confiscate our guns? Do we submit if they come in to kill our children? Do we submit if they tell us that we should accept abortion or force us to have abortions? I mean, all right, if the government can force us to,
that's different, yeah.
If the government can force us to get vaccinated to hold employment, what's to stop them from forcing us to have an abortion to hold employment? I mean,
I don't think those are exactly
from a secular perspective. From a secular perspective, they look at
continuum.
So, all right, wait. Before you go off on one of your 30-minute tangents here, let me illustrate what I'm saying. The secularists, the liberals, basically argue that abortion is medical care, and that having children for some women hinders their ability to be employable in the world or to maintain a career. And that's probably true. I mean, having children does hinder women from holding down a career in some situations. All right. So say you go to an employer right now, employers are saying, get vaccinated. The reason we want you to get vaccinated is because not doing so puts other people in danger, and it causes you to waste our time by laying out of work for 2 weeks when you could have avoided that by being vaccinated. From their perspective, I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's part of their argument. All right, so a woman gets pregnant on the job. Why wouldn't an employer be able to say, go get an abortion, or, you're going to lose your job because we can't afford for you to be out for 6 weeks or whatever?
Well, again, I don't think those are exactly the same thing. Getting a vaccine all by itself is not sinful. This particular vaccine is in a class by itself. But I'm saying, like I got the flu vaccine 5-6 years ago, whatever. The notion of getting vaccinated for a particular illness is not in itself sinful. Abortion is always sinful.
No, I'm not saying that it is sinful necessarily to get the vaccine. I'm just talking about from a secular corporate / government perspective here, if they have the right to force you to do one thing, what's to stop them from forcing you to do another? If there's no, you know, it's like a slippery slope kind of a thing. If there's no line drawn there.
No, I get what you're asking or what you're talking about here. Then let me start with this. When we're dealing with privately owned companies, I get very leery of people telling privately owned companies what they can and can't do. So as far as the vaccine's concerned, I disagree strenuously with the idea of doing it. But in my view, a privately held concern has the right to tell people, we want you to wear pinwheels on your head or you're not employed here anymore. In the case of a vaccine, I think I don't like it. It's a bad policy. I'm against it. But I don't like the idea of the government stepping. I mean, that's just the other side of the same coin. Okay, you don't get to require what you want to require for as a prerequisite for employment with your company.
Well, I agree with you, but these mandates are not necessarily coming from businesses. They're coming from the federal government, and in some instances, state governments and even local governments. They're the ones that are
this idea of like any company over 100 employees. I think it was Biden said. Now that's absolutely a different story. When the government steps in and says, "Okay, I'm now going to dictate to a private company, here's the requirements that you have to make of your employees before you can employ them." That's absolutely false. Now, I would not put it past them to extend that to abortion. Right. Now, again, let's just say a woman is on the job. She gets pregnant while she's working at a certain place, and the company says, well, we don't want to put up with you. You know, we're in the middle of whatever season or not in the middle of whatever season. We need you to be here. You're not going to be able to be here, so you're fired. I don't have a way to say that they don't have the right to do that. Now, they can say, we require you to have an abortion, and I can say, go play in the freeway. I quit on the spot. Or, you know, obviously no Christian can comply with that kind of requirement. But I've never been real big with now if the government steps in and says, okay, you have to comply with this particular company. I don't know why they would do that. I don't know if we've gotten to that point yet. That would be another story too.
Well, when you talk about working for government, I mean,
yeah, the government's a different. The government's the biggest employer in the country.
Right. That's what I'm getting at.
No company employs more people than the government. You know, do we want the government to be able to say, you know, Teresa Dinsfritter or whatever somebody's name might be, you've gotten pregnant, we need you to be on the job if you want to continue with your employment in the post office, you know, headquarters in Washington, D.C. or whatever, you have to get an abortion. Is that a legitimate? No, obviously to require an abortion is not any time. You require an abortion for any reason is automatically requiring murder of somebody. Is there a difference between that and, say, a private company?
Well,
like for the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much with you on that.
That's a good question.
I mean, you know, we as conservatives want to have the freedom to not bake a cake for a gay couple or something. Then, you know, we have to extend that freedom to, you know, businesses on the other side.
That's a business. Yeah, that was a business. Well, it's been more than one. That's a business owner acting on conscience.
Right.
Let me give you a quick illustration, and I won't be 30 minutes.
Go ahead.
Years ago, I worked at a place, and there was a very nice black woman working there who happened to be about my age at the time. Boy, this is going back a long time. But anyway, her father owned a small electrician's outfit. They went out in the vans and they did electrical work for people. And there was this big thing going on in New York City about affirmative action, you know, requiring companies to employ a certain percentage of minorities or be in violation of some statute, you know, in the state of New York or in New York City. And she was talking about how she was in favor of that. We should, and, you know, my response was, now she knew me well enough to know I have it's not even a matter of having nothing against black people. I don't see black people as substantively different than white people. I mean, obviously we have different skin color. We descend from different parts of the world, but she knew me well enough to know that's just not my thing. We're not dealing with somebody who looks at us as being different species or something. So I told her, I said, in my view, if your father, now this wasn't the case, but if your father just decided, let's just say I wouldn't apply to your father for a job, and he just said, I don't like white people. I employ only black people. I would disagree. It might hurt my feelings, and I would think it was bad policy, and I might even be against it morally, but he has the right to do that. He has the right to just say, it's my company. I'll hire whoever I want to hire or not hire whoever I want to hire for whatever reasons I say. So that, how is that applicable here? If a private company says you have to be vaccinated to work here, I don't know how we can compel them to not have that policy. When it comes to government positions, I don't know how we can compel them to not have that, for them to not have that position either. On the other hand, the government compelling concerns other than themselves, like a private industry, to say you have to require vaccines. Now we're getting into a different territory.
All right. I feel like we're getting a little off track here from what we originally wanted to talk about, which was where exactly do we draw the line as far as submission to Caesar? If Caesar comes in and decides they're going to confiscate our weapons, do we go down without a fight? Do we hand them over? Do we form a militia and fight back? Do we go to civil war? Do we join the Confederacy and and hope that half the military stands on our side? I mean, what exactly is
Well, this presupposes the question of whether or not the Second Amendment is a biblical guarantee, also has biblical authority. Does it? That's the real question. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the administration of a free people. Blah, 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 right. The thing. I don't remember the exact wording at the moment, but it goes back to that question. I got to be completely honest with you. I don't know. There are big principles here. The Bible does, I believe, give us the right to self-defense, especially if it's for not in the act of evangelism, let's say, or for the Son of Man's sake. Being persecuted, I don't think that Christians should defend themselves against persecution for the gospel's sake, directly, let's say.
I would probably agree to that for the most part. I think that there are probably instances where you could, especially when it comes to protecting your family from violence, particularly, or other forms of not persecution, but where it would cause, your family to embrace sinful activity or.
Well, that can never happen.
Right. So
the difference between
that's what I'm saying. What I'm trying to get to here is, we talked about this earlier.
Somewhat, but
we did talk about this earlier.
No, Jeff. I mean, does the Bible?
No. Let me ask my question. Let me ask my question because the other people haven't heard my question, and then you can answer.
Okay. I don't know if I answered it earlier, but
the government of the United States, hypothetically, Joe Biden and his administration and Congress is on board with this, pass a law, mandate, whatever, that they're going to come to every house and confiscate weapons and kill anybody that they think is mentally ill or a threat to their new world order. I asked the question differently earlier, but I'm rephrasing it now.
That's two different issues. You got two different issues in there, killing the mentally challenged. And
okay, no. What I'm talking about, kill all of the people that they perceive to be a threat to their new world order. Okay, namely conservatives, Bible-believing Christians. Okay, so they think that we're mentally ill. In their perspective, Bible-believing Christians who hold to a biblical worldview, in their mind, are mentally ill people. Take them out. That's the decree. All right, so they start coming door to door and confiscating our weapons and blowing people away? Do we fight back or do we submit?
And as you'll recall, my answer earlier was it would depend on the specific circumstances extant at the moment of that.
I just gave you the circumstances.
And yeah, but what I'm saying is that what is the public response at the moment?
I don't care about the public response. I want to know what the biblical response is.
The biblical response would depend upon whether or not this is a community resistance or whether it's not myself individually resisting the government, and for what reason.
So the government comes into your house and believes that your wife is a threat to the New World Order because she tweeted something about homosexuality being a sin or something. And they come in and they point a gun at her and they said, it's time to take you out. What do? Do you protect your wife or do you submit?
Well, if it gets to that point, any resistance is automatic death. Just resign.
That's not the question. That's not the question. You're dodging the question.
You're asking me the question.
You're dodging the question.
I'm not dodging the question. What I'm saying is that
whether or not the ultimate outcome of that is you all die, is it a
what it comes down to is
biblical response to protect your wife against government or protect your family against government when they're trying to kill you?
Or if it's persecution for the Son of Man, if it's actually persecution over the gospel, I would die rather than violate that principle.
Not you, your wife.
Well, my resistance equals my wife's death. If it gets to that point, we are not leaving that house alive if I resist. So it's a matter of whether or not we go to prison or we die. Let's not kid ourselves. If a cadre of...
I'm not asking you, though. I'm not asking you what the ultimate response would be. I'm asking you, would it be sinful to attempt to protect your wife in that situation because of the submission to government clause?
If there was say a sexual assault or something being perpetrated upon my wife, I would kill whoever tried to do that and let the Lord sort it out. If they say we're going to either take you to prison or you die in this living room, that's a different question.
Neither one of those is what I asked.
Well, but you are, if you're asking me, do we defend ourselves? That's the same thing as asking, do I die right now in defending myself? Because that's what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, that could be a noble cause, right?
It could be a noble cause. But what I'm saying is let's resign ourselves to the fact that if the government puts its sights on people, you may kill some, let's just say you kill some agents right then. You won't live 24 more hours. I mean, you might be able to escape somewhere. They're going to shoot you on next time they see you.
Your answer is pragmatic. You're still not telling me whether or not it's sinful to attempt to do so. That's what I'm asking.
Again, it would depend upon the specific circumstances that they're coming after us for. If it's just
I told you, because your wife tweeted something on Twitter about homosexuality being a sin, so they perceive her to be a threat to the New World Order because she doesn't think in lockstep with their secular agenda.
See, now, if you told me they saw your wife tweet something about how Jesus Christ is Lord over the United States government, and they see that, like communist China does, as a threat to the authority of the state.
That's not what I asked, though.
I know, but I'm just saying, if you did, these are not simple questions. Yeah,
I know they're not simple questions.
There's not the check marks, and this is how you do it.
I know they're not simple questions.
There's a half a dozen different scenarios that could be in play at the moment something like that happens. If it's a Twitter post over homosexuality, would I go to jail over that, or would I kill somebody? Or should all of us go to jail? And here's the next question: if they put us in jail, the children become wards of the state. But here is the other reality. I've gone over this part of it with other people in the past, actually. If they actually put their sights on you like that, the children are either dying or becoming wards of the state. They are going to have their way with you. Anybody who is so deluded as to think that they are going to go nose to nose with the United States government with their small arms and come out on top is not thinking straight.
All right. You're right. You are right about that, but you still kind of... You're still kind of dodging the actual question here, but let's move on. I think you and I are both.
The question. It depends.
Well, maybe continuing this discussion will help us work it out some more.
Okay.
I think you and I both agreed earlier, at least to a certain extent in some situations, that an organized mass rebellion could actually be rightful, maybe, depending on the situation.
The American Revolution. Before we go on, this will take 10 seconds. I want to make clear that I am a staunch Second Amendment proponent. I've been a gun.
So, I know you are.
I am not one of these people that's like, I don't know about this whole gun thing. I believe in the right to keep and bear arms.
Absolutely, I do too.
Up by scripture, whether or not that's a guaranteed biblical right, it's not an unbiblical right the way it's spelled out in the Constitution. Let's put it that way. So I'm in favor of that. I'm happy to see people availing themselves of their Second Amendment right the last year, including lots and lots of black people. I want that. The more guns in the hands of the public, the better, even though there's going to be some repercussions to that. People aren't trained, blah, blah, another whole. That's okay. Just to make clear that I am a pro-gun person.
Right.
You know that. I mean.
All right. Where was I going? What was I going to ask? Well, before we move on again, let me just say, I do think
waters, man.
What?
These are tough waters right here.
It is biblical to, especially for men, to be providers and protectors of their family.
I agree.
Part of being a provider is to provide security.
I agree with that too.
In fact, the scriptures say that men who do not provide for their families are not worthy of the kingdom.
That's
basically.
Exactly right.
So
I would say that goes for protection too. Now, if we're talking about a private citizen, like say we're being assaulted, by criminals, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah,
I won't like it, but I'll pull that trigger without thinking twice. But that's different than having the force of the federal government behind them.
I will cede to you that having the force of the federal government behind you is definitely a deterrent from trying to rise up against them.
And one's legal.
That's hard.
They may be wrong, but one's legal and one's not.
It's certainly not something I would want to do by myself. So let's with that, let's move on to where we were going. Organized resistance to tyranny. We saw this with the, arguably with the Confederacy. We've seen it all throughout history. We saw it with the my brain is fried.
That makes two of us, isn't it tremendous?
Anyways, if it gets to the point to where it's basically the right versus the left in this country, and the left has power of the government through Congress or whatever, and they're just cracking down, they're going to do everything they can in their power to not just persecute, but more than that. I mean, their persecution is already here to a certain extent, but to make it where it's almost impossible to live a Christian life or to even live in accordance with the scripture. Okay, for example, my children, and we've talked about this before, I don't want my children raised by public schools where they're indoctrinated and taught to celebrate homosexuality and this, that, and the other.
I agree.
I don't want my children raised that way. I think doing so is ungodly.
Couldn't agree more.
But the left wants to make it to where homeschooling is illegal and you have to turn your children over to the state. So is that cause for mass rebellion?
There's no way I would ever do that. Now, my children are grown, but there's no way I would ever do that. I would never say, I'm going to turn my children's hearts and minds over to the state. There will be repercussions to that. This
Okay,
kind of stuff we have gone over.
Yeah, now here we go again. They have the force of the federal government behind them.
That's correct.
You try to stand up to it, you're going to die, and you're going to hand your children over to them anyway. What do you do? Maybe. Exactly.
They might die too.
They might. They're not going to die if it's just you standing up by yourself, though. And you don't have, power of mass rebellion behind you and half the military that's on their side.
You're right. I mean, that brings about the same circumstance as before, as we were talking about before. Which way is the wisest biblical way to deal with this? Now, if they're threatening harm against my children, I'm not saying that we shouldn't resist in this circumstance. But if they say, look, send your, Sodom and Gomorrah, send them, bring out the man so that we may know him or something like that, that's the bullets are flying. But if they say we're taking you all to jail, that's not good either. We're just here to imprison you. Although if the country's moral compass degrades to that point, who knows what anybody's going to do when they show up at your door. But yeah, that is the toughest unthinkable circumstance. I stand up with all the arms I have. I kill 2 or 3 government agents, and in the process, they kill me. Now they have, without me there, my wife and my children to do with whatever they want. Or I don't resist, and all of us live, but we all go to prison. Neither one of those are any good. Both of those are horrible circumstances. This is why I say you got to, like I was talking about earlier, you got to be close to that cross. You got to have a prayer life. You got to be plugged into the Holy Spirit. You got to have sound fellowship, and you have to have a conscience that is sensitive to the things of God. Because if something like this is sprung on you, there are decisions to be made right then. I think this kind of falls under, the principle where Jesus says, take no thought of what you will say. They're going to deliver you before princes and kings, to paraphrase. Take no thought, because in that hour I will be with you. I'm not sure exactly how to handle that. Those are horrible choices. And people will be listening to this, some people, if they were listening to this, it's these fanatic right-wing maniacs. This kind of stuff's nobody's threatening any of this. Nobody ever threatens any of this at first. It gets to this point over time. We are definitely marching in that direction. These people, there are people right now who write for the New York Times who would love to see men like you and I dead and have access to our wives and children, especially our children. If they had their way, they would just say, poof, push a button, poof. All the conservative, serious Christians vaporize right now. They would love to see that. It hasn't gotten the force of government yet. But we're going in that direction. These are tough. This is where you have to say, Lord, it's in your hands. Show me what to do.
So bottom line, if it got to that point here, which it will eventually, I'm sure, barring divine intervention from God, you're saying that you would join the resistance, grab your whatever, and fight. I have to be careful with what I say on YouTube.
Yeah, I know. I'm well enough armed. Let's put it that way. All legal, by the way.
It is. And not only legal, constitutionally, it's required.
Yeah, it's got everything I have is completely legal. Yes, to answer your question, especially now. Here's the thing, too. Let's go back real quick to the time of the Revolution, the 18th century. We had the majority of the public in favor of the rebellion, the revolution against the English crown. We did have the Tories in the South who fought for the side of England against their own colonies. But for the most part, we had men like Washington, for instance, excuse me, John Paul Jones in the Navy, all of these tremendous leaders at the time, and a huge sea of men who were willing to fight that battle. There was unity there. That was a, because people have asked the question, was the American Revolution legitimate? For the Christians who were alive at the time, was resisting that government a legitimate thing? I think so. The trouble is nowadays, this country's so split. I mean, you could probably, if you put everybody in one place who think alike, people who would say, I'm willing to take up arms against my own government if it got to that point, you would have a formidable force. It wouldn't be a 15-minute battle. I mean, they do have hardware we don't have. That's another whole story. But the trouble is we got these people scattered all over the country, and between us and them are also millions of people who would take no thought about fighting against us. There was organization. They could openly have rallies and meetings in buildings where they could organize. How are we going to fight the king? We don't really have a way to do that today. The second we would try to say, okay, we're having a meeting this Saturday, I mean, you can't do that without them finding out. They'd shut you down immediately. We talked about that earlier too. I think God is putting us in a place where our only security is relying on him.
Yeah, that's probably true.
There is no, here's what we're going to do and it's all going to be okay. No, that doesn't exist.
But the question is, I think the question we're asking, though, is from a biblical perspective, what is the right response? Obviously, relying and trusting on God is the utmost proper response to this. But
what does that look like?
Right.
And again,
I mean, is it better for all of us to just die? Is it better?
Let's go through biblical history and church history.
I mean, God always has a remnant. I mean,
God always has a remnant.
I mean, they might take out 80% of us or 90% of us or even more, but,
most of the Christians on earth are not in the United States anymore either. I doubt if
you're right about that.
And an average Sunday morning pre-COVID, when everybody was in church, I doubt if 10% of the people were actually truly converted, regenerate believers.
There are probably more true Bible-believing Christians in China than there are in the United States.
I'm pretty sure that's true. I think that's correct. People don't realize this. They're not going to get on China.
No.
But, what's the biblical response? Again, it depends on what's happening at the moment. Is there an actual, now at the time of the revolution, you could say this is a righteous cause. Look at the things that are being done to us that are hindering our ability to live a life to the glory of God. We had lots of men united, even if that wasn't necessarily their primary priority. We're still on the same side, and the result of this conflict, if it falls to our favor, will allow us to live our lives to the glory of God. Back then, that was a legitimate choice. We don't have that kind of organization now. But what do we do if they kick the doors in? These are tough questions.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's crossed my mind. It hasn't crossed my mind as a serious option. But, as you're considering every possibility, they're about to haul away myself and my children to some state camp like they do in communist China, and North Korea is even worse, if that's possible. Would I be better off taking all our lives rather than putting myself in their hands? That's not a legitimate option. But, like I said, having every single thing on the table, what are all the possibilities? None of them are good. You're going to have to just say, Lord, again, I'm not looking for voices. I'm not waiting for a finger to come and draw on the wall. Okay, the agents are here. Here's what I want you to do. That's why I say you have to be prayed up and mature, spiritually mature before any of this starts. I mean, that's a big, it's kind of like, boot camp. You can't take a guy, recruit him into the army, put him on an airplane, shoot him over to some other part of the world, hand him a weapon and some equipment and say, okay, here's, the bombs are falling and stuff. And he's like, how does this thing work? What's this lever here do? I mean, you have to prepare him ahead of time for the battle so that when the battle starts, he's prepared to fight that battle. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual. We have to have those weapons sharp and ready at the time when those battles start. That's why right now our priority should be, number one priority is How do I live the holiest, most committed, and most pleasing life to the Lord possible, so that when these circumstances arise, my instincts, my intuitions, my responses are according to the Spirit and according to the Word, and not according to fear, not according to self-will. You're not taking away my stuff. As bad as it would be for them to take away my stuff, that can't be the reason I fight. I really do. I think God's putting us in a position where we have no other choice. He has, Pharaoh's army behind us and the Red Sea before us. What's the options here? Behold the salvation of the Lord. He parted the Red Sea. Now, are we going to see miracles like that? I'm not saying that necessarily, but this is not like new stuff. God's people have never been in a position like this before. Yes, they have.
Yeah, and they definitely have.
And throughout history, most of the time, Christians didn't do much resisting. You take a look like throughout church history, since the first century, Christians went down in the name of Jesus. As much as I believe in the right to keep and bear arms according to the Constitution, I have higher commitments even than that.
Well, there of course, people, and I don't think anybody would argue that.
Well, it's a tough stuff. Hopefully people who will hear this, because I know people, they'll see the topic and be like, good, I'm going to get my answer. This is terrible stuff. I want to find out what I should do. They're not going to come away from here with these kind of answers.
No, we're definitely not giving concise, definite answers here. So I hope nobody listening actually thinks that. I can tell you that it is extremely difficult to navigate these waters. I can say that flopping over and putting pinwheels on your head and walking through Walmart is probably not the most legitimate answer out there. But there is a certain, there is definitely a certain level of submission that we are called and required as Christians to do when it comes to government.
What if they said, here's a weird hypothetical. What if they said, we're going to take you over to Walmart and give you some pinwheels for your head. And if you go walking through Walmart with these pinwheels, we'll leave your family alone. I'm kind of half joking.
Well,
but
yeah, I mean, I know you're joking, but I mean, the principle there is a valid, legitimate concern. I mean, something ridiculous. Like, I mean, right now they're saying, put a diaper over your face and, you have to wear a face mask everywhere you go, or, will do bad things to you and your family. You can't hold down a job or something like that. They're going to punish you for not wearing a face mask, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in some circumstances it might be wise to comply with that and maybe resist where you can and go through the proper channels of, trying to fight these things in court. Maybe, I mean, if you don't agree with them, I mean, I can tell you right now, I don't wear a face mask anywhere. If I'm required to wear a face mask somewhere, I just don't go into that store.
Pretty much. I only go to a few places. Much the same with me. I don't wear a face mask.
Fortunately, it's down here. It's probably not as big of a deal as it is in like the super, super liberal states. I mean, we are slightly a blue state because we have a blue governor, but, we're not completely controlled by the left yet.
If I had to go into somewhere, I'll give you one exception. The Walgreens, where I have to get my prescription for my insulin, diabetes stuff, they require face masks in the drugstore. I'm not going to go to the mat over having a face mask on for 10 minutes while I'm in that store. I get out and say, okay, I got to go in here and get I'm in there for
you're talking about private business, though. I mean, again,
I walk back out, I take it off. That's like the only place that I put, because what's my alternative? I'm not going to get my medicine, or I'm going to stand out here and get into fisticuffs, have the police come because I refuse to put it. In that case, it just seems wiser. Put the freaking mask on, walk in there, get your stuff, and walk out.
Yeah, you're back into private business though. That sounds like it's a private business, probably enforcing.
Yeah, it's a private corporation. Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, a private corporation, I think, as stupid as it is, I would probably tend to agree with you for the most part that, they can do whatever they want with that. And if you don't like it, go somewhere else. And, a lot of this stuff, it could be a lot of this stuff coming from the federal government. This is a tangent here. It could be good because they're saying, these regulations are going to be enforced on businesses with 100 or more employees. Well, maybe that's good for small business. I don't know.
Although 100 employees would be considered a small business, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean, maybe some of these great giant corporations will flop and, dissolve, and more small businesses. Yeah, America was built on small businesses. Big corporations are not.
That's right.
Mean, they have more power than the government in a lot of. In fact, really, in more they're more powerful than the government in many situations. Which that's a whole
like the entertainment industry.
That's a whole other podcast. We're getting into like real, actual, serious fascism there. The anti-fascists don't really have any idea what fascism is.
No.
That's a whole other podcast. We're not going to get into that.
But, as far as the thing, I don't go to, unless I have no choice, like the drugstore. If I go walk up to a place I don't have to go in, it's like face mask required. I just don't. It's the same thing with, I conceal carry. I have a permit to conceal carry in Michigan. Most places, almost everywhere, you can go in legally, unless a private business has it posted. There's a bunch of laws about this. It has to be posted at an average eye level and big enough to be seen. If they say we do not permit firearms on our premises, then I can't take it in. It's trespassing. I just don't go in that business.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, as far as private business is concerned, I agree. They can do whatever they want. You can choose to go there or not. It's up to you. But you don't really have that freedom of choice when it comes to government. That's pretty much.
They want as much chaos, as much confusion, as much fear, and as much instability as possible. Because at least they believe this, and there's a significant portion of the population where this is true. The more instability there is, desperate people will look to the only place they know because they do not know God, and that's the government.
Yep.
Only the government's big enough to help fix me, save me, daddy, government, government, government. And they've been taught that over a few generations now.
They teach that in public schools. That's part of their indoctrination system. It's designed from birth until death.
Christians buy into that stuff. Or people?
I know they do. The Gospel Coalition is the worst of them.
It's unbelievable. It's like, and I got to tell you, most of the founders, especially guys like, Jefferson, for instance, they hated government. They understood that government was a necessary evil. You have to have government. You can't have civilized society without some type of government. But, Jefferson famously said, that government governs best, which governs least. The whole way this country was designed was government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's why, it starts out with we the people, not we the government. Yeah. The whole idea was that the people were supposed to be in control, have self-determination, that they be in control of that is completely gone now. Government is in charge of everything.
Yeah. And back to your point about, people looking to government because it's the only authority figure or comfort or whatever that they know. Yeah, I did an article on this a few weeks ago at Reformation Charlotte. It's like this whole idea of statism is a religion in and of itself.
Oh, yes, and it is. I saw that article, by the way.
Yeah, and it's, like you said, Christians are buying into this, and they do. You read some of the stuff that comes out of the Gospel Coalition, you would think that they hold, in many instances, government higher than they do the Word of God.
Well, they certainly hold cultural trends higher than they do. You can't get this kind of stuff out of the Word of God by any stretch of the imagination. No. By any stretch of the imagination. But, the thing is, people they feel when they're in a position, especially take this COVID.
Well, look at, for example, the Gospel Coalition and the ERLC, by the way, recently both,
among others,
came out, in favor of doing away with religious exemptions for vaccines, saying that, the government has a legitimate interest here. And, despite what you believe, or despite your conscience, or despite your own, research that maybe you think the benefits don't outweigh the risks of it, you shouldn't get a say in it. You should have to submit to, the government forcing the vaccine on you and your family.
And you know what?
Both the ERLC and the TGC said that. And,
I saw that, yeah. This comes from a woefully deficient theology. At what point did the Church of Jesus Christ start trusting pagans to this degree? These are people, according to Romans chapter 3, who are children of the devil. There's not one that who seeks after God. No, not one. These are people who are enemies of Christ. They're our enemies. They hate us. According to Jesus, a pastor just preached on it this morning. They hated me, they'll hate you too. Where did the Christians get the idea that these pagans with vast piles of money and power are somehow their friends?
You should see the people they're platforming. The guy that Russell Moore was really good friends with from the NIH, Francis Collins.
Yes.
So
the guy,
I cannot tell you how many times Russell Moore brought this guy on to use him and to prop him up as a fellow believer, a fellow Christian, and as somebody that Christians need to trust for medical advice on vaccines and COVID and this, that, and the other. Come to find out that this guy's out there promoting, not just promoting, but actually advocating for, writing articles for pro-LGBT stuff. He's involved in this thing with selling aborted fetuses and just all of this stuff.
Well,
this guy's like neck deep in this stuff.
Biogenesis, whatever it is, that outfit over there. I don't know if
Biologos.
Yeah, Biologos. He's been involved with them for that place is an absolute tool of the devil. We're going
this
back
guy is
10 years.
There's no way you could look at the work this guy does. If I didn't know him and I looked this guy up and saw the work he does, there's no way I would come away with the notion that this guy's a Christian, a believer. He might say he is, but he's no more a believer than the United Methodist transgender priest.
Right.
He's. I don't really know any other way to put that, but
people like the Gospel Coalition and just individual Christians, when you get people in enough fear, somebody told me when I first got saved, I can remember who it was, like 35 years ago, that whatever you turn to in your hour of need, that's your God. You can go into church and praise God, hallelujah, bless his holy name, but when the chips are down, where you turn, that's your God. Whether it be alcohol or whatever else it might be, that's your God. And in today's environment in the United States, these manufactured crises all the time. I mean, Rahm Emanuel famously said, you never let a good crisis go to waste. Once you pick people in a crisis, there's your opportunity. And if you get people scared, they will turn to something bigger than them. They feel vulnerable. I'm just a person here. I'm in danger. What can help me? And what they see is way up on that exalted hill is the government. The government has all this power, all this money, all this resources. The government can save me. Yeah. They certainly don't. They might say, some of them, they believe in God. I believe in the providence of God. I might even say they believe in election. But when the chips are down, who do they turn to? The government. Fix everything. The government. They want the government, like the government wants to do now, to fix everything. That's why I'm not going to get on a big thing about this, but this is one of the reasons why I am so thrilled to see so many black people arming themselves the last year. And black women. There's a bunch of gun shops around. I go in there, that place is absolutely overrun with black women buying their first gun. They're taking training, self-defense classes, how to handle it. I'm like, that's a good thing, because you know what that does? It empowers them. They're defending, they're taking responsibility for their own security. And what that does is that a little bit, it snips that dependence on government. They look around and they realize these people can't really protect me. Like the old saying, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. I see that as a good thing, because what it does is it puts a little bit of their own self-sovereignty back into their own pocket.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's the root of it here is the root of all of this is one class of people believes in collectivism and the other class believes in individualism.
Politically speaking, yes.
Politically speaking, but culturally speaking, and even to a certain extent religiously speaking, and because
The only
Christian
place group
leftist.
think is allowed is in the gospel. The gospel. Let's not kid ourselves. There's one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one word. We are supposed to all think
your salvation is individual, and your responsibility for that is individual. It's not collective.
Absolutely.
I mean, God did die for the elect collectively, of course, but
He died for them individually.
Your part in that is, well, He died for the church, is what I mean collectively. But your part in the church is absolutely applied to you individually.
I have my own relationship with God. This is not Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
the priesthood of all believers. When I go to prayer, it's me and the Lord, and He can address me and millions of other people at the same time. But I have my own individual relationship with the Lord. Absolutely. And you're right about the collectivism thing too. If you take a look at China, I remember when what did they do a few years ago? They had some big. Did they host the Olympics? I don't think. Did they? China recently host the Olympics? Good. I don't pay attention to any of that crap.
I couldn't answer that question.
It was some big international affair where they were putting on a spectacle type thing, and the whole thing was thousands of people, including children, all dressed the same, all moving the same, everything being done in unison. They marched out on this big field and stuff. And you look at that and you realize that is the personification of their form of life, their culture, their form of life. Everybody's a stamped clone of everybody else. And their function is to contribute to the well-being of the state. Now, that sounds all well and good, but, inside the church, that's actually a biblical principle amongst the people of God. But that can never work in the world.
In the world, no.
That's
the whole idea of communism and Marxism and socialism is the collective.
What's funny is that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this country harnessed sin in an actually positive way. Let me explain. The genius of our form of government and our form of economics was that when people did what was best for themselves and their family, it was also best for everybody else. They actually made that a real thing because they realized somebody's not going to work for somebody else's benefit. That's why all these countries collapse. If you take a man like, in the former Soviet Union, whatever, and say, if you grow such and such amount of corn, you'll get paid this much money. If you excel and grow this much corn, or if you produce this much product or this quality level of product or don't, you make the same amount of money. We're going to take whatever you don't need to live on, absolutely live on, and we're going to give it to somebody else. People won't work for that. It's human nature. I work for my benefit, my profit. And the genius of our form of government was that when people did what was best for them, it was also best for everybody else.
That's for everybody, right? Yeah, so they, in a way, they harnessed greed and
they harnessed greed. I mean,
redirected it into societal benefit. Yeah,
you're
right.
Vision of your people will just work because they just love everybody. So,
but I don't necessarily think it's. I think God designed us that way, and it's really biblical to work in a way that benefits yourself. I mean, if a man if a man doesn't want to work, then let him not eat. I mean, that's a principle.
There's nothing wrong with profit. There's nothing wrong with enterprise. There's nothing wrong with innovation. There's nothing wrong with, like I said, enterprise, building a company.
I'm saying that I don't think that there's anything wrong with desiring to work for your own benefit either. I don't think that that's necessarily greed. It can become greed at a certain level, and it does often, especially in corporate America.
See, that's the thing. That does get out of hand because right now there's going to be people listening to this and saying, yeah, when they do what's best for them, it's not best for everybody else. They wind up screwing all the little guys and doing and scooping up all the money for themselves. You know what? They do that. Once they get to a certain size and have a certain level of power, they do. There's no getting around that. If there's one thing I trust less than big business, it's big government. You put the two of them together and it's a disaster.
Yeah. Well, what do you say we wrap this up? We're hitting close to an hour. And
what if I disappear?
We were only supposed to go 15
right.
20 minutes. So
as long as God's
we covered a lot, but I mean, we still didn't even barely scratch the surface. So I
There's
have a
some
feeling we're
meaty
going to be
stuff
doing
here,
more on
man.
this.
These are big. We should go over. I thought about that. I never did bring that up to you. We can talk about it afterwards.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be doing plenty more of these in the days ahead. So, with that, we'll say good night. Thanks for being on, and see you next time.
Amen.
See you.